There was a table sat out under the tree in front of the house, and the marsh hare and the hatter were having tea at it. A dormouse was sitting between them, fast asleep. The other two were resting their elbows on it and talking over its head. Very uncomfortable for the dormouse, thought Alice. If only it was asleep, I suppose it doesn't mind. The table was a large one, but the three were all crowded together at one corner of it. No room, no room, they cried when they saw Alice coming. There's plenty of room, Alice said indignantly. She sat down in a large armchair at one end of the table. Have some wine, the marsh hare said with an encouraging tone. Alice looked all round the table, but there was none on it but tea. I don't see any wine, she remarked. There isn't any, said the marsh hare. Then it wasn't very civil of you to offer it, said Alice angrily. It wasn't very civil of you to sit down without being invited, said the marsh hare. I didn't know it was your table, said Alice. It's late for so many more than three. Your hair needs cutting, said the hatter. He'd been looking at Alice for some time with great curiosity, and this was his first speech. You shouldn't make personal remarks, Alice said with some severity. It's very rude. The hatter opened his eyes wide when hearing this, and all he said was, Why is a raven like a writing desk? Come, we should have some fun now, thought Alice. I'm glad they're asking riddles. I believe I can guess that, she added aloud. Do you mean that you think you can find out the answer to it? Said the marsh hare. Exactly so, said Alice. Then you shall say what you mean, the marsh hare went on. I do, Alice hastily replied. At least, I mean what I say. That's the same thing, you know. Not the same thing a bit, said the hatter. You might as well say that I eat as the same as I eat what I see. You may as well say, added the hare, that I like what I get is the same as I get what I like. You might as well say, said the dormouse, who seemed to be talking in his sleep, that I breathe when I sleep is the same as I sleep when I breathe. It's the same thing with you, said the hatter, and there the conversation dropped, and the party sat in silence for a moment, while Alice thought over that she could remember about ravens and writing desks, which wasn't much. The hatter was the first to break the silence. What day of the month is it? He asked, turning to Alice. He had taken his watch out of his pocket and was looking at it uneasily, shaking it every now and then, and holding it to his ear. Alice considered a little and then said, The 4th. 2 days wrong, sighed the hatter. I told the butter wouldn't be good suit the works, he added, looking angrily at the marsh hare. It was the best butter, the marsh hare replied. Yes, but some crumbs would get into it as well, said the hatter grumbly. You should have put it in with the butter knife. The marsh hare took the watch and looked gloomily as he dipped it into his cup of tea and looked at it again. But he could see of nothing better than to say than his first remark. It was the best butter, you know. Alice had been looking over her shoulder for some curiosity. What a funny watch, she remarked. It tells the day of the month and doesn't tell what o'clock it is. Why should it? Muttered the hatter. Does your watch tell you what year it is? Of course not, Alice repeated readily. But that's because it stays the same year for as much a longer time together. Which is just the case with mine, said the hatter. Alice felt dreadfully puzzled. The hatter's remark seemed to have no meaning in it, and yet it was certainly English. I don't quite understand, she said, as politely as she could. The dormouse is asleep again, said the hatter, and he poured a little tea on its nose. The dormouse shook his head impatiently and said, without opening his eyes, Of course, just when I was going to remark myself. Have you guessed that riddle yet? The Hatter said, turning to Alice again. No, I give it up, Alice replied. What's the answer? Haven't the slightest idea, said the Hatter. Nor I, said the marsh hare. Alice sighed wearily. I think you should do something better with the time, she said, than wasting it asking riddles with no answers. If you knew time as well as I do, said the Hatter, you wouldn't be asking about wasting it. It's him. I don't know what you mean, said Alice. Of course you don't, the Hatter said, tossing his head contemptuously. I dare say you've never even spoken to time. Perhaps not, Alice cautiously replied, but I know that I can beat time when I learn music. Ah! That counts for it, said the Hatter. He won't stand being beaten. Now, if only you kept to the same terms with him, he'd do almost anything you like. For instance, suppose it was 9 o'clock in the morning, just at the beginning of your lessons. You only had to whisper a hint to time, and round goes the clock a-tinkling. 1:30, time for dinner. Oh, I only wish it was, the marsh hare said to itself in a whisper. That would be grand, certainly, said Alice, thoughtfully. But then, I shouldn't be hungry for it, you know. Not at first, perhaps, said the Hatter, but you could keep it to 1:30 as long as you liked. Is that the way you manage? Alice asked. The Hatter shook his head mournfully. Not I, he replied. We quarrelled last March, just before he went mad, you know, pointing his teaspoon to the marsh hare. Or was it for great concern given by the Queen of Hearts that I had to sing? Twinkle, twinkle, little bat, how I wonder what you're at. You know the song, perhaps. I've heard something like it, said Alice. It goes on, you know, the Hatter continued, in this way. Up above the world you fly, like a tea tray in the sky. Twinkle, twinkle. Then the dormouse shook itself and began singing in its sleep. Twinkle, 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 twinkle. And then went on for so long that they had to pinch it to make it stop. Well, I've hardly finished the first verse, said the Hatter, when the Queen jumped up and bawled out, He's murdering the time! Off with his head! How dreadfully savage! Exclaimed Alice. And never ever since that, the Hatter went on in a mournful voice, he wouldn't have do anything I asked. It's always 6 o'clock now. A bright idea came into Alice's head. Is that the reason why there's so many tea things put out here? She asked. Yes, there is, the Hatter said with a sigh. It's always tea time, and we never have time to wash things between the whiles. Then you'll have to keep moving round, I suppose, said Alice. Exactly, said the Hatter, as the things get used up. But what happens when you get to the beginning again? Alice ventured to ask. Suppose we change the subject, the marsh hare interrupted, yawning. I'm getting tired of this. I vote the young lady tell us a story. I'm afraid I don't know one, said Alice, rather alarmed at the proposal. Then the dormouse shall, they both cried. Wake up, dormouse! They pinched it on both sides at once. The dormouse slowly opened his eyes. I wasn't asleep, he said in a hoarse, feeble voice. I heard every word you fellows were saying. Tell us a story, said the marsh hare. Yes, please do, pleaded Alice. And be quick about it, said the Hatter, or you'll be asleep again before it's done. Once upon a time there was 3 little sisters, said the dormouse, beginning in great hurry. Their names were Elsie, Lacy, and Tilly, and they lived in the bottom of a well. What did they live on? Said Alice, who was always very interested in questions of eating and drinking. They lived on treacle, said the dormouse, after thinking for a moment or two. They couldn't have done that, you know, said Alice gently. They'd have been ill. And so they were, said the Dormouse, very ill. Alice tried to fancy herself in such an extraordinary way of living. What would be like? It puzzled her so much that she went on, but why did they live in the bottom of a well? Take some more tea, the marsh hare said to Alice, rather eagerly. I haven't had any yet, Alice replied in an offended tone, so I can't have any more. You mean you can't have any less, said the Hatter. It's very easy to take more than nothing. Nobody asked your opinion, said Alice. And now who's making personal remarks? The Hatter answered triumphantly. Alice didn't quite know what to say to this, so she helped herself to some tea and bread and butter, and then turned to the Dormouse and repeated her question. Why did they live in the bottom of the well? The Dormouse again took a minute or two to think about it, and then said it was a treacle well. There's no such thing. Alice was beginning to get very angry, but the Hatter and the marsh hare went shh, shh, and the Dormouse sulkily remarked, If you don't be civil, you can finish the story yourself. Oh, please go on, said Alice. I won't interrupt again. I dare say there may be one. One indeed, said the Dormouse indignantly. However, he consented to go on. And these three little sisters, they were all learning to draw, you know. What did they draw? Asked Alice, quite forgetting her promise. Treacle, said the Dormouse, without considering it at all this time. I want a clean cut, interrupted the Hatter. Let's all move round. He moved on as he spoke, and the Dormouse followed him, and the marsh hare moved into the Dormouse's place, and Alice rather unwillingly took the place of the marsh hare. The Hatter was the only one who got the advantage from the change, and Alice was a good deal worse for it, as the marsh hare had upset the milk jug into his plate. Alice didn't want to offend the Dormouse again, so she began very cautiously. I don't understand. Where did they draw the treacle from? You can draw water from a water well, said the Hatter, so I should say that you could draw treacle out of a treacle well. Stupid. But they were in the well, Alice said to the Dormouse, not choosing to notice the last remark. Of course they were, said the Dormouse, well in. This answer so confused poor Alice that she let the Dormouse go on some more without interrupting it. They were learning to draw, said the Dormouse went on, yawning and rubbing his eyes, for it was getting very sleepy, and they drew all the manner of things, everything beginning with M. Why an M? Asked Alice. Why not? Said the marsh hare. Alice was silent. The Dormouse had closed his eyes by this time, and had gone off into a doze. But in being pinched by the Hatter, who woke it up again with a little squeak, went on, that begins with an M, such as mousetrap, and moon, and memory, and muchness. You could say things are much of a muchness. Did you ever see a thing as a drawing of a muchness? Really, now you ask me, Alice said, very much confused. I don't think so. Then you shouldn't talk, said the Hatter. This piece of rudeness was just about as more than Alice could bear. She got up from great disgust and walked off. The Dormouse fell asleep instantly, and neither of the others took the least notice of her going, even though she looked back once or twice, half hoping that they would call after her. The last time she saw them, they were trying to pull the Dormouse into the teapot. At any rate, I'm never going there again, said Alice, as she picked her way through the wood. It was the stupidest tea party I've ever been to in my life. Just as she said this, she noticed that one of the trees had a door leaning into it. Very curious, she thought, but everything's curious.